crash of the A300 over the Persian Gulf occurred on July 3rd, when the passenger plane flying Flight 655 from Tehran to Dubai via Bandar Abbas was hit by a missile fired from an American cruiser, Vincennes. Today we will learn how this terrible tragedy occurred, in which 290 innocent people died, including 66 children. Why didn't the US government officially admit guilt and apologize for what happened? And we'll also learn the results of the crash investigation, which confirms that Flight 655 followed the flight plan for commercial airlines, was within the designated civilian corridor, and was transmitting code in civilian mode. At the same time, the US government considers what happened as a military incident and believes that the cruiser's crew acted in accordance with the current circumstances. Flight 655 departed from Bandar Abbas at 10:17 a.m., 27 minutes behind schedule. The flight took place within the international air corridor directly between Bandar Abbas and Dubai airports, following a very simple flight pattern, first climbing to 14,000 feet, 4,300 meters, then following a straight line to Dubai, followed by a descent and landing. At the same time, the USS Vincennes, a US Navy missile cruiser equipped with the Aegis Information and Control System, was in the Strait of Hormuz. The cruiser was commanded by Captain William Rogers. The cruiser operated under the pretext of protecting Kuwaiti tankers from attacks by warring Iran and Iraq. It was deployed to the Strait of Hormuz after the US Navy frigate USS Samuel Roberts exploded on an unidentified sea mine on April 14th. An additional reason was information that Iran had purchased Silkworm anti-ship missiles, a licensed copy of a Soviet Union missile, from China, so the US Navy forces operating in the area as part of Operation Earnest Will to protect tankers needed an Aegis-equipped ship. On the morning of July 3rd, the Vincennes entered Iranian territorial waters in pursuit of Iranian motorboats from which a helicopter that had previously taken off from the cruiser was fired upon. The boats were in Iranian territorial waters at the time. Contrary to the cruiser crew members' calculations, the Iranian airliner continued to fly over the Persian Gulf. After no responses to several radio calls, Vincennes at 10:24 a.m. launched an SM-2MR Standard Missile Surface-to-Air Anti-Aircraft Missile at an unidentified aerial target about 12 miles, 20 kilometers, away at that moment. A missile hit the plane, causing it to break into at least two pieces and crash into the Persian Gulf, killing all 290 people on board. Only after the missile was launched was the plane identified by the cruiser's crew as an Iranian airliner. The Pentagon initially reported that Vincennes shot down an Iranian F-14 fighter jet, but retracted that statement and confirmed that a civilian airliner had been shot down. According to official US government statements, the airliner was misidentified by the Vincennes cruiser as an attacking Iranian warplane because Flight 655 was flying a profile similar to that of the F-14 Tomcat, an F-14 Tomcat in service with the Iranian Air Force. However, analysis of Aegis data showed that the plane was actually gaining altitude rather than descending to attack. Aegis Combat System is an American shipboard multifunctional combat system, which is an interoperable network of shipboard situational awareness. Defeat means, such as SM-2 Standard Missile 2 and more modern SM-3 Standard Missile 3, anti-aircraft guided missiles, and control means, formed on the basis of wide implementation of automated combat control systems. The system makes it possible to receive and process information from sensors of other ships and aircraft of the compound and issue target designations to their launchers. The plane took off from Bandar Abbas Airport, which served not only as a commercial airport, but also as a base airfield for Iranian F-14 Tomcats. According to the same reports, Vincennes attempted to contact Flight 655 by radio on the military emergency and civilian emergency frequencies, but received no response from him. The airplane was not equipped to receive military frequencies, and messages on the civilian frequency did not allow unambiguous identification of the airplane, because the speed relative to the ground was indicated, which differed from the instrument speed of the airplane. The pilots may have thought the messages had been relayed to an Iranian Orion aircraft that had operated in the same area shortly before. Very strange wording that a passenger plane was not equipped to receive military frequencies. Rather, a military cruiser should be equipped with civilian frequencies. What do you think about that? During its final flight, Flight 655 was in continuous radio contact with various air traffic controls using standard civil aviation radio frequencies. Seconds before the missile was launched from the Vincennes cruiser, the pilots of the airliner were negotiating in English with air traffic control at Bandar Abbas airport. According to the official investigation, there was no radio equipment aboard the cruiser Vincennes capable of listening to the airwaves and negotiating on civil aviation frequencies other than the international emergency frequency. Subsequently, US warships operating in the area were provided with appropriate equipment to utilize civilian frequencies and access flight plan information for commercial flights. A report by the International Civil Aviation Organization states that there were 7 attempts to contact Flight 655 on military frequencies and 3 attempts to contact it on commercial emergency frequencies, with requests addressed to an unidentified Iranian aircraft. Meanwhile, the pilots of the airliner may not have considered their aircraft unidentified because the airborne radar transponder was on and functioning properly throughout the flight, and the Vincennes crew did not use the Iranian aircraft's unique code from its transponder when communicating. These findings were outlined in a report by Admiral William Fogarty, who led the official investigation into the causes of the incident. The report was declassified and published only partially, the first part in 1988 and the second part in 1993. The report states that Vincennes records, sides information, and credible intelligence information support the fact that Flight 655 followed the flight plan for commercial airlines, was within the designated civilian corridor, transmitted code 6760 in civilian mode, and gained altitude continuously from the time it took off from Bandar Abbas airport until it was struck by the missile. When questioned in a 2000 BBC documentary, the US government stated in a written answer that they believed the incident may have been caused by a simultaneous psychological condition amongst the 18 bridge crew of Vincennes, called scenario fulfillment, which is said to occur when people are under pressure. In such a situation, the crew will carry out a training scenario, believing it to be reality while ignoring sensory information that contradicts the scenario. In the case of this incident, the scenario was an attack by a lone military aircraft. In general, the US government views what happened as a military incident and believes that the cruiser's crew acted in accordance with the current circumstances. The cruiser's commander was later awarded the Legion of Merit for his successful service from 1987 to 1989. The circumstances of the incident, as outlined in the official report, met with a great wave of criticism in the American press. 3 years later, contrary to initial statements, the US Navy confirmed that the airliner was in Iranian territorial waters at the time of the crash. The Iranian government considers the attack on the civilian airplane a deliberate illegal act. According to Iranian officials, even in the case of an identification error, which Iran questions, the firing on a civilian plane in neutral waters was the result of criminal negligence, not an accident, and should be treated as an international crime. Official sources, as well as independent experts, cite a fairly wide range of factors that may have influenced the decision that led to such a tragic result. The cruiser crew had insufficient interaction with civilian air traffic controllers due to both strained relations between the US and Iranian sides and insufficient training of personnel. Flight 655 deviated about 3 miles, 5 kilometers, from the center of the air corridor shortly before it was shot down. It is argued that such a deviation is atypical for commercial liners, and that the deviation was toward the cruiser, so could have been considered an attack departure. The incident occurred about a year after the US frigate USS Stark was fired upon and damaged by an Iraqi Mirage aircraft in the Persian Gulf. An Exocet anti-ship missile hit on the ship, killing 37 crew members and severely damaging the ship. After the incident, the US Navy operating in the Persian Gulf implemented new safety regulations, authorizing the firing on potentially dangerous aerial targets. It's worth noting that Saddam Hussein apologized, saying that the plane's pilot mistook the frigate Stark for an Iranian tanker. Additionally, Iraq provided $400 million to compensate prisoners of war, hostages, and Gulf War casualties, including the injured sailors of the frigate Stark. A psychological examination of the Vincennes team revealed that the team's lack of military experience under stressful conditions led to subconscious distortion of the data received from the Aegis system and poor decision-making. Weapons and software experts cited inadequate officer training and a lack of experience in making decisions based on information from a computer system as complex as Aegis. In addition, the Aegis user interface was awkward and had significant flaws. In this terrible disaster, 290 people died, 274 passengers and 16 crew members. There were 156 men and 52 women aboard Flight 655. Among the 66 children, there were 28 boys and 38 girls. On July 11, 1988, US President Ronald Reagan announced that the US would offer compensation to the families of the victims, but not to the Iranian government, on a voluntary basis without admitting legal liability, ex gratia. Ex gratia is a Latin expression, literally meaning out of grace, used most often in legal contexts. When something is done ex gratia, it is done voluntarily, out of grace, out of kindness. The legal or natural person making such payments does not recognize any legal responsibility. At the same time, Ronald Reagan called the actions of the Vincennes crew a justified defense, stressing that the US does not consider itself guilty of what happened, and partially put the blame on the Iranian government. On May 17, 1989, Iran filed a lawsuit against the US in the UN International Court of Justice, seeking damages and finding the US guilty of violating international air transport conventions. After 7 years, a settlement agreement was signed between the US and Iran, after which the court case was dropped. Under the terms of the agreement, the US was to pay about $132 million in compensation, and Iran waived further claims against the US over the disaster. While expressing regret for the loss of life and calling it a terrible human tragedy, the US government has not officially acknowledged guilt or apologized for what happened. In this context, articles and books on Iran-US relations often quote a phrase by US Vice President George Bush Sr. "I will never apologize for the United States of America. I don't care what the facts are.